Hi folks, thanks to be here for this talk about evolving your APIs, a step-by-step approach, or a pragmatic approach, or a no-nonsense approach. Well, you catch my drift. I'm Nicolas Frankel. I've been in IT for 20 years, mainly in technical roles, and since a couple of years I'm developer advocate. Right now, I advocate for Apache APISIX, which is an API gateway provided under the Apache license, but it's also an Apache project. And in this talk, I will use Apache APISIX as the tool to demo what I want to show, but of course, you can use any other API gateway you'd like. Your first API, you probably remember the first time you designed an API because you were very much focused on semantics, on to do the right REST approach, the REST approach that was like in the thesis. But actually, even if it's your first few projects that you already know about all this stuff, well, you have been working in a project most probably. And then I know how it works. I've been there. You have short-term concerns, such as the schedule, delivery, bug fixing. And so probably you didn't concern yourself too much with the version 2. How do you evolve your APIs? So when your boss or the business comes to you and asks you to do a V2, then probably you are a bit like Luke. But don't despair, because I hope that I can show you a few tips. But don't despair, because I hope that in this talk, I can show you a few tips and tricks that will convince you that you shouldn't lose hope. So this is the initial situation. Basically, you've got your application, and in the API gateway realm, we can call that an upstream, service, whatever. I will use the upstream word here because Apache APISIX uses it, but use the one you want. And so you might expose it directly over the internet. Then you've got endpoints, and clients can send requests over those endpoints. And of course, the first step is you shouldn't expose your upstream directly. Probably it's not the case. Probably you have a reverse proxy. And in most cases, I don't believe anybody directly expose their upstream to the internet. But if you don't, then that's the first step. And then the API gateway will do the routing. So depending on the domain, a header, a parameter, the path, or anything, it will direct the request to the service. So you can have multiple services, but you have a single or at least a cluster of API gateway in front of every request. And this API gateway handles all cross-cutting concerns. It can be, as mentioned, routing, it can be rate limiting, it can be authentication, it can be anything. As I mentioned, you probably have that already in the form of a reverse proxy of a web server that plays this role. I believe, however, that API gateway, as the name implies, has a broader capability pool. So an API gateway can do anything that a regular reverse proxy can do, but adds capabilities really focused on APIs. So first step, as I mentioned, introduce an API gateway. So I will demo it right now. So here I'm in my IDE and I've already prepared a Docker Compose file. You can use Kubernetes, of course, if you prefer. You can use your own machine, but I believe that Docker Compose is quite interesting in that it gives you a good overview of everything. So here is my Docker Compose file. Here I am using Apache APISIX as mentioned. Here I rely on etcd, so that's a really interesting stuff, is that the configuration is stored on etcd, which is a distributed database. It's the same database as used by Kubernetes. And because like, even though I told that APISIX depend on etcd, it still takes more time for etcd to really start properly. So I needed to wrap the starting command of Apache APISIX in like a wait for script. Anyway, normally you shouldn't do that, should work out of the box. And then I have the APISIX dashboard. I will demo it afterwards. It's very useful to monitor your APISIX gateway, and also Prometheus. Then also you can monitor it, but in more in a graphic way. Then I have Grafana for the display, and here I have my two APIs. So I have the first is the new API, the first is the old API, and the new one is the old API. It's in Kotlin, but it's not that interesting. The technology can be anything you want. You might want to start with Node.js and migrate to the JVM. You might want to start with Python and continue to Rust. I mean, you have two different versions of the service. One is the old one, and the second is the V2. So I will start the Docker Compose file. So it might take some time, depending on what you have. Here I have a good machine, so it will start quite fast. And here you can already see that old API in new APIs, which actually in this case are like JVM-based application, have already started. So now it's time to do our first demo. So I will just use curl, and my API gateway runs on 9080. Then I can say hello, and it's not found. And if we check, we can say curl localhost. So here it's 8081 hello, which is the old API, and I have something. And the reason for that is actually the API gateway doesn't know how to route this request. It has no rule. So the first idea is to create such a rule. And to create such a rule, we have two choices. The first choice is to use the APISIX dashboard. So you have this dashboard that allows you to create routes, delete them, update them, or whatever. And we can do it also with the command line. And the API itself offers a REST API. So you can actually manage your API, your REST API, with a REST API. So that you can do the demo yourself, and I will have the link of the GitHub repo in the end. I have already created scripts that you can do. And because I want everything to be easy, I don't want you to install curl if you don't have it. Everything is based on Docker. So here I will run the Docker curl image, so that again, you don't need to install it. I will use the same network as my Docker Compose file, which is the name, here is the name of the default network. And then I send the request to this endpoint. It's it's a put, so it will create a route with this ID. And of course, because we don't want everybody to be able to update our configuration, we need to be authenticated. Here we are using an API key. Now we pass the payloads. So we can set a name, we can set the HTTP methods, we can set the URIs. And as I mentioned, here we have the concept of an upstream. Upstream can actually be different nodes. So you can direct to a cluster, and then you have here the algorithm that will balance every request to the different node in your cluster. Here you can set anything. I have a single node, it's just a demo, but so you know. And also you can set plugins. So here I have the Prometheus plugin, so that every request that will be sent will be recorded, and then we can display it through Grafana in the end. Let's play it. Okay. And let's curl again. Yes. And now we have our route. So I will just show it like that. Now we have the route. So when we curl, it goes to the API gateway. The API gateway checks where it should route this request. It routes it to the upstream. Upstream gets the request, return the response, and API gateway forward it back. So now we have a working system, but we are still back to step 0, which means that, okay, we still have an upstream that is not versioned. So remember, our idea is to version our API. And so the idea is there are multiple ways to version your APIs. You can have version based on the path. You can have version based on the header, or you can have version based on the query parameter. In the following, I will show you how you can do it with the path. So my idea is I will keep, for backward compatibility, the first route, which is not versioned, and I will introduce a new route, which is versioned. Again, I will do it through the REST API. When I created my first route, I used the most straightforward way. I just sent the whole payload. But actually, Apache APISIX has different abstractions available, different objects, if you will, if you want to talk Kubernetes. So we can define routes, we can define plugins, we can define upstreams, we can define a lot of different objects. So this is what I'm going to do just to show you how it's possible, and now you can reuse the objects one after another. So here I will create a dedicated upstream, and again it's the same as before. You set the network, you set the endpoints, but here I'm using upstreams instead of routes. I pass the API key, and the payload is actually much simpler because you only need to define the upstream. So here I define the upstream. And let's see how it works under the cover. I always want to have a visual way, so I will use the Apache APISIX dashboard for that. So localhost 9000. So I'm on the dashboard. I can get the routes, and of course, because I'm not authenticated, it tells me, hey, who are you? I don't allow you. Here I have the bare minimum. I'm just using the default login and password. And here we can see that we have the route that we created initially. We can see how it looks. Here you can see all three paths. Here you can see the get method. And we can see the upstream that we just created. So from a visual point of view, then we have everything that we are looking for. Everything that we created is in the config, and it's good. So let's continue. Now I want to create the plugin configuration. So here it's a new endpoint, but the rest is the same. I can send the payload. I will here execute it. And it works. And now what I can do is I can associate the plugin config with a route and an upstream. So the first thing I need to do is to actually add an additional plugin to my plugin config. And in that case, it's proxy rewrites. So that means that when I receive a request that, I receive a request that starts with v1 something, I should just use the something. So when the API gateway receives a prefixed request, it will remove the prefix and rewrite the request and yes, it's forward it to the upstream without this prefix. And now the second thing I need to do is to create a route. So here, the route, again, name, method, URI, and here we are referencing the upstream and the plugin config by their ID. So let's run it. Great. Now let's curl again, but this time I want just to check that it's still working. My old endpoint is still working. And I will start with v1. And again, I expect now that this request ends up at the correct endpoint. Yes. So now I have two routes and both point to the same upstream. Now comes the really fun part. What happened now is we want to make sure that people stop using the unversioned endpoint. Because if you have one version endpoint and one unversioned endpoint and you leave them forever, well, you will never be able to get rid of the first. So always at some point, try to say, okay, this is not good anymore. And for that, REST offers us, well, HTTP offers us the redirects, and we can have a permanent redirect moved permanently 3 or 1. So now I want that when clients send requests to the unversioned endpoint, they receive the redirect to use the version endpoint. And now at this point, there will be two options. Either the client will automatically follow, and that's a good thing. That means that, well, nothing will be broken, or it won't. In that case, it's also a good thing because then it will create errors on the client side, and they will check the logs and they will see the 301 and they will wonder, hey, where should we go now? So even without knowing your clients, you are able to direct them in the direction you want them to be. As you can see here, I will still be using a route and a plugin. So in Apache APISIX, most of the configuration is based on plugins. So you really have a pluggable architecture. You can add plugins, remove plugin, configure plugin, whatever. So now it's time for us to update our first route. So what I want to do is every time I receive a request to these routes, so the existing route, I want it to redirect with a 301 with this URI v1 and the originally requested URI. So if we run it, And now I call the initial write. It tells me, hey, you have been moved permanently. And of course, it's real REST. So if we ask curl to follow the location, it works. So again, as I mentioned, two options. Either there is an error on the client side and you can check, hey, move permanently, and then you check the logs to see configuration, or you just like follow automatically and there is no issue. You see, it's not easy to actually like hint at clients that something has changed. It would be much, much simpler if we could tell them in advance. And for that, we need a way to contact them. And to contact them, they need somehow to register. But actually, developers don't like to register. I'm a developer, or at least I think I'm still a developer, but I dislike to register. I don't want to give my contact details. So as most developers, I need an incentive. And in that case, you might say, hey, let's have a limited number of calls by minute, by hour, by day. And if you want to go higher, well, we will ask you to register so that people who want to like kick your tire can still like try it without any issue, without any like huge step. But if you want to be a bit more serious about it, if you really are a user, then you are like, let's say, invited to register. So for that, Apache APISIX doesn't have any plugin out of the box at the moment, but it's a very pluggable architecture. So nothing prevents you from creating your own plugin. And in that case, I have written a Lua plugin. And so I beg for your forgiveness. I'm not a Lua developer. And because I'm very, very lazy, and as I mentioned, I'm not a Lua developer, I've just copy-pasted an existing plugin and I've changed it to suit my needs. So here we can see the configuration options that are allowed. And here we can see the properties of the plugin. And here we can see the create limit. So this is what I've copy pasted. And the important part is this one. So basically here I'm telling, hey, I will check if there is a consumer configuration. So does the person, the client who wants to call me is authenticated? And if it's authenticated, then just return. If not, do as the old plugin did. So I've just added an additional check. Check the consumer configuration. If I'm authenticated, then let it pass. Let's do it. Here is the plugin configuration. So if I call it more than once per time window of 60 seconds, then it should tell me, hey, 429. And here, very important, please register. And here, of course, it's a dummy URL, but I expect you to put your real business URL. Okay, let's call it now. So here I will put v1 so I won't be redirected. Of course, it will work the same. Yes, it works. And now it tells me, hey, no, it doesn't work because you are not authenticated. I need to create a client. For that, again, I have an API call. So I will be using the simplest plugin. Basically, I have a plugin called KeyAuth, where the key is here, like my key, and it gives me the ID of John Doe. So if I run it, and now I can, call this one, and I will need to pass a header, and this header So the key by default is API key. Since I didn't change anything, it should be it. And the value here is my key. Sorry. And now I'm enjoying unlimited calls because I nicely registered. The next step, we have set up our V2. Our V2 is ready and we want to test. And of course, we've done all the possible tests, the unit test, the integration test, the end-to-end test, everything. But at some point, we need to get to production. So we need real production data. We need to test in production, basically. And if I tell you testing in production, you will tell me, hey, let's do canary release. And I will say yes. But before you do that, what you can do is actually you can not just like send a fraction of your user, just as in regular canary release. What you can do is you can mirror the production workload, send it to the upstream, discard the response, but just to check that the requests, they don't revoke with your new version. And then canary release will be a second step. So here we can do it. So I've updated my plugin config to like have an explicit like rewrite of the URI and still have my own plugin and then do the proxy mirror. The reason why I'm not doing rewrite is because of priorities. Every plugin that you call has a specific priority. The priority has been baked in the plugin. And so here, you don't care about the order. Actually, you don't care because it's not an array, but you can put them in any order. The computation of the order in which they will run, like APISIX will get the plugin, will check the priority, will order them, and will run them in turn. If we check, for example, my Lua plugin, here, the priority is 100. And so you have the highest priority first, and then it goes down, it goes down. Then you've got the request that goes to the upstream, and then afterwards you've got the negative priorities. I need to be straight with you. This doesn't work at the moment. And the reason for that is that the proxy mirror plugin, the stuff that does the duplication of the workload, we have a little bug. But it's being fixed. And so perhaps when you watch this video, it will have been fixed. So regardless, I still want to show you how it works. So here is the default Apache APISIX dashboard on Grafana. And what I did is I've added two widgets. The first widget is like the monitoring of the old API. So here you can see all the requests that I've sent. And of course, they're all targeting the same endpoint hello and the status and whatever. And you see over time what happens. And now what I will be doing, because now I have the mirror, I'm also monitoring the new API. Okay, now let's enjoy some unlimited calls. And I will change it because here I also want to show you that I've added some parameter. Great. Everything seems to be working so far. Now going to Grafana, we can see my new requests here. And here we can see my requests that have been mirrored. And you can see that, hey, there is a slight bug. Basically, there is no rewrite. So it sends it to the same endpoint, still prefixed with v1. And so it calls the upstream with v1/hello, and of course v1/hello doesn't exist. It doesn't know. It does only know /hello. And here we can see it's working because there I have my other endpoint, which is basically generic. So slight bug at the moment, but it's still the way to go. Like, don't directly do canary releases, just like check, like get a fraction of the production workload and put it on your upstream. You might uncover bug there, perhaps in the JVM null pointer exceptions, whatever, that were not caught before. So it's always nice to have this idea. Now we can do canary release. So now is the time for canary releases. And let's do it. So here I have several steps. The first one is to create an upstream for, well, the new version. And then I can like reload the configuration if I need it. That's very important. Actually, APISIX is able to hot reload its configuration every time. Now I changed the plugin config. So I went back to the proxy rewrite. I still have my node limit. And the canary release plugin is called traffic split. And then you can have different rules. And here I have the simplest rule possible, like every request goes to one upstream, the other goes to the other upstream, one upstream, the other upstream. Let's see how it works. Oh, forgot to run it. And if I don't run it, of course, it won't work as well. Yes. So I have 50% chances of getting on one upstream and 50% on going to the other upstream. So I think that my sample is quite good at the moment. The final step is to tell your users, folks, this old version doesn't work anymore. Or don't expect this version to work anymore in some amount of time. Again, if they have registered, it's good. If they didn't register, there is still hope. And for that, there is an ITEF draft. It's called the deprecation header. And as its name implies, you can deprecate your endpoint this way. So the deprecation header is just either a date, so I will be deprecating it at this time, a boolean, like it's deprecated right now. And then you have an optional link that points to the new resource. And if you really, really want to be very, very nice to your users, then you can have an additional field header with the sunset. So you might have a deprecation date. So saying, hey, after this point, it will be considered deprecated. And then you have a sunset date and say, after this date, well, it won't be there anymore. I forgot at this time to create my v2 route. So I need to create the route before deprecating the first one. Here, so let's see. So now I'm always on my v2 version. And for the deprecation, I will be using a new plugin called response rewrite. And here I will add new headers. I just want to say that it has been deprecated because it's a demo. Normally, probably I should set a date in advance. And then I write the link to the new endpoint. So v2 works, v1, and we want to have like a verbose. Now we see, hey, deprecation true, and this is the new endpoint to call, v2. And you can qualify the relationship saying, hey, this is a successful version. Step 9. Step 9 is you can finally enjoy a bit of rest because, hey, it was quite involved. But now if your business comes to you or your manager comes to you and asks for a v3, you are ready. You can enjoy some rest because you deserved it. Thanks for your attention. You can read my blog. You can follow me on Twitter. If you want to do the demo by yourself, I really recommend it. Then you can go on GitHub. Everything is available. And if you want to know more about Apache APISIX, then you are welcome to check our page. Thanks a lot again.